Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Welcome back to class. Hope you all had a good weekend, and there's really about 2 minutes left until we get today's meeting started. So good to be back with you guys, and we'll do our last review session in just a minute here. Okay. Hi, Jonah. Good to see you. Everybody else here, nice to see you guys again. Feel free to say hello or leave any kind of comment anytime. Just another minute. Hello, Ian. Hey there, Ian. All right, folks, let's get started. It's more or less 12:45. So as usual, good to be with everyone. Welcome back, and hope you all are having a good finals week. This is finals week, so we've come down to the last couple meetings. Well, the last meeting. Today's the last time that you'll see a live stream on YouTube on Thursday, just as we've done before with the other exams and quizzes. I'll just send you the document that has the blank test form right before class time, and then you'll have until the end of the class period to just return back your attached file with whatever answers you wrote. So the final's on Thursday. Today is our second review session, and this is the last full meeting before the final exam. Notice that I sent around an announcement, what was it, Sunday night, I think, or Sunday afternoon, just letting you guys know that the other homeworks, they've all been graded, all the other assignments are all finished. Thanks, Ian. If you sent me your request yesterday, Ian, then I'm going to get to it just after class today. I went through one big round of requests that all were sent to me before, let's say, midday yesterday. So I think maybe, Ian, you might have sent me a request last night. A couple of you might be in that case, but if you are, don't worry. I will certainly give you your response later tonight, and you'll know your grade for that, for the whole class. So just hang tight. I think I said in the announcement that it could take maybe as much as 2 days, but I'll get it to you sooner than that. It's just that with finals here, I have a lot of emails from all kinds of students from different classes. So anyways, yeah, Noah, you're right there. You're in good shape. As long as you do well on this final, you should be in pretty fine shape. But anyway, guys, yeah, like I was saying just before Ian's question, please do send me your request, because I'm going to give you 10 points of extra credit just for simply asking for that. And once you do, then I'll hit you back with your reply. You'll know exactly where you stand, and then you can, focus on the final itself. So other than those things, as you know, it's time for more review. And you got your study guide, right? So go ahead and pull up your copy of it and use the study guide to help guide us through this meeting. And we'll just try to finish up with as many of these topics as we can before whatever, 2:10 today. All right, guys, so that's the plan. Thanks, Noah, for your enthusiasm, sprinting to the finish. That's the right attitude, I guess. So I'm going to start us with the second half of the study guide, because we really focused on the first half last Thursday. And also, if you want more in-depth on that first half of the study guide, you can also just go back to the earlier lectures in our lecture series for this class, and you can find the original review sessions that we did for that. So there may be some additional info there that you can find if you really want to focus on any of those things again. But today we're going to make it the second half of the study guide. That's the focus. So I'm going to get us started with the topics that are listed under Chapter 5. That's the one that has to do with fallacies. And as usual, do your best if you can to try and just come back with the answer real quick, and then we'll just keep moving on, and hopefully we can complete this whole list in the time we have. Okay, so good to see everybody. I see you all there in the chat. Thanks for stopping in and leaving a comment. So let's start with this question. What's a fallacy? Just overall, like, what is a fallacy? What's the definition of that word? Tell me, if you think you can, what a fallacy even is in the first place. There's a lot of different types of fallacies, but what's the broad just concept of a fallacy in general? Let me know. Let's see. It's something about arguments. What kind of argument is a fallacy? Hi, Anthony. Welcome back. Question for us, which is the first review question on the study guide for Chapter 5. What's a fallacy? It's when an argument has a certain thing in it, but what is it? That's right, Mateo. Thank you. So it's an argument that contains logical flaws or errors. So it is a logically flawed, or you can say erroneous argument. When the argument has a specific type of error or flaw, we define it and we call it a fallacy. And there have been fallacies that have been enumerated and discussed throughout in the past thousands of years. Devin, no, we did not. I don't know if you just arrived, but what I was saying to everybody is that we're going to start on the second half of the study guide, because we will not be able to take enough time to go over those other items with the amount that we have still left. But I also said that if you want further insight or depth on those chapters that we did not review on Thursday, then I would just ask that you maybe go back, look at the earlier review session that we did prior to the midterm. And that midterm review session would have focused more on some of those other topics that we did not yet get to focus on last Thursday. But for the sake of, covering everything in the class and not just having a bunch of midterm review sessions, I'm trying to focus on our second half today, okay? So fallacy is when there's a logical flaw or an error in an argument. Okay, now there are different types of fallacies. So I'm asking next about the first big category that we studied. What is a fallacy of ambiguity? What kind of fallacy is a fallacy of ambiguity? What's the problem with the ambiguity fallacy, or fallacies of ambiguity? These are arguments where, what's the problem? If it's based on it being ambiguous, then these are arguments that contain what kind of things? So just help me out with that. And, keep in mind the list. Keep the list with you. Don't wait for me to just ask you the question. Pull up the list and try and think about what I will ask you next. So, Devin, when there's a grammatical mistake in an argument, no, this is not it, Devin. You're thinking of amphibole, but I'm asking a different question. I'm asking, what's a fallacy of ambiguity? All right, Jonah, you've got it. I'm going to have to erase your comment, though. Okay, so anyway, Jonah. Fallacy of ambiguity is when an argument contains ambiguous words, sloppy grammar, or a confusion between two similar concepts. That's right. Now, Ian, not exactly. Different interpretations is a part of it. A confusion between two similar concepts. That's what you meant to write. Yeah. So the different interpretation thing, Ian, the only reason I'm kind of pointing out your comment is that you might be thinking of equivocation. With equivocation, you have, well, that's the next question. So I'll let us get to that. I don't want to spoil the fun. But basically, yes, Jonah and Devin, you have the right definition here. A fallacy of ambiguity is when an argument contains ambiguous words, sloppy grammar, or, and there's the third point, or a confusion between two similar concepts. All right? Now, hi, Matthew. Welcome back. To the next thing, what is equivocation fallacy? Maybe, Ian, I thought maybe you were thinking perhaps of equivocation when you wrote different interpretations, because that's something that has to do with equivocation. But maybe some of you can tell me more specifically. Okay, so Devin, when there's a key term in an argument that appears multiple times and it does have different meanings, yes. Okay, so what could be like an example of equivocation? Any case where there's a word that's used more than once and the meaning seems to have changed. Like if somebody, I think we used a pretty silly example to first present it, which was about the different possible meanings of the word bank. So say that Joe is at the bank and a bank is a financial institution, then you may come to the conclusion that Joe is at a financial institution. But if we look at the word bank, it's possible that in the first premise it refers to the Mississippi River banks, like the edge of a river. And in the second premise, it refers to, like an actual bank that lends money. In that case, the conclusion doesn't follow. Ian, you're talking about the F word. I guess I can imagine an equivocation fallacy like that, where in the one case it refers to like a sexual act, but in the other case it just refers to, like, I don't know, the exclamatory sort of force that the F word typically has. So I said, here you go, like F this class. And then someone said, really, are you going to F the whole class? And you can imagine that a person, for humorous effect, would be trying to use it in the sexual sense in the second premise, whereas in the first premise it was used as a sort of derogatory reference to the class that they don't like. But it's a funny example. At any rate, you know what I'm saying? Like, there's lots of examples that could be generated based off of the concept. So anyway, Devin, you say synonym words. Well, no. I mean, they wouldn't be synonym words if they were actually used with different meanings. They would look the same, but they would have different meanings. So it'd be not antonyms, which are opposite meanings, but they would just have differences of meaning. Okay, so then we'll go on to the next. Amphibole. Amphibole. Now, Devin, you can tell me what you think amphibole is, or anybody else. The amphibole fallacy of ambiguity is which one? Okay, good, Noah. When there's a grammatical mistake in an argument, which allows for more than one conclusion to be drawn. Correct. Let's see. Yeah, this can happen a lot with even the way we use plural pronouns a lot of times now to refer to a generic person without naming their gender. If you say Jack and Jill went up the hill, but they got sick when they went up there. I mean, it might refer to Jack and Jill both getting sick, or it might mean they in the sense of, one person that goes by the pronoun of they rather than he or she. And it would not be possible to know without further clarification. Although oftentimes they, in these type of contexts, is associated with the plural pronoun. But an easier case than that would be the masculine or feminine pronoun when there's a, number of different subjects to whom the pronoun could refer. If I say, Jack and Bill went up the hill to get his cell phone back, we just don't know whose cell phone is being retrieved because we refer to two different people. Yeah, so I'm just giving some examples. There's also the possibility of ambiguity grammatically when it's not a person that's being named, but rather just a thing. Like in the case that I asked on the other quiz, what was it? The boys enjoyed the boys had some ice cream cones up at the ski lodge, but they were too cold to enjoy. They could refer to the cones. They could refer to the boys that are eating the cones, and we just don't know. Okay, so grammatical ambiguity, that's amphibole. Yes. So then let's go to the fallacy of accent. What's that one? Fallacy of accent. Somebody knows it, so just give it a second. See what pops up. Accent fallacy. And welcome back, Paul. Saw you there. Anytime now, just let me know. What is it? Okay, there we go. Thanks, Mateo. The accent placed on a specific word can change the meaning of a sentence. Yes. So the meaning of a sentence or argument changes based on which word or phrase within it is being emphasized. Okay, so like, yeah, why'd you burn down the house? Parent says to the kid. Kid is like, sorry, why are you playing with matches? That was the example. Kid says, oh, that's the thing. I wasn't playing with matches. I was just, setting fire to things with just real serious attitude. And if that's the case, the person just emphasizes the word playing so as to escape the force of the rule by making it seem that the rule wasn't intended to be interpreted that way. Okay. You say like homographs, Ian. Well, like a homograph is when you have two different words that that are actually different words, but they're spelled the same way and they're pronounced differently. Think of wind and wind. You know, that's not even a case of equivocation because they're not pronounced in the same way. But it's not particularly necessary in this case to refer to that point in linguistics because homographs are not involved necessarily in the accent fallacy. Okay, but let's go on. So we have accent. That's when the meaning of a word or statement or argument changes based on which word is emphasized within it. Okay, so then accent fallacy. Oh, no, sorry, I meant to say division. Thank you. What's from the Greek language? The word homographs? Well, homo just means same. Like homogeneous means all of one kind. So homograph means written the same, but different word. But yeah, we can move to the next. What is fallacy of division? Anybody? Let me know. Or the concept of an accent. Well, a lot of things derive from Greeks, at least in the West. So I would assume maybe you're right, but I have to know. Let me know though, what is a fallacy of division? So characteristic of something is like wrongly assumed to be a characteristic of something else, but you could fill in the blanks. Okay, thanks, Jonah. So when a characteristic of a whole group is incorrectly assumed to be a characteristic of each member, that's right. So say that a person's like they're a professor and they say this is my best class, and you know Noah's a member of the class, so he's a very, very good student. Well, anyway, Noah, you are a pretty good student, but just in general, right? That wouldn't necessarily be the correct conclusion to draw because you have a class which as a group maybe has a high average scores, but that does not mean that every individual member of the class is going to have the same because they might just be in a part of the group that averages up above what their individual level was. So that happens a lot. People maybe make assumptions about men or about women or something, and then they trace those assumptions down to each individual member. Or maybe there is like a generally shared a characteristic that a category does have, but it's just not seen in each individual. Like men are stronger than women physically, but that does not mean that just one randomly chosen man is stronger than a woman that we might compare him with. And women make less money than men, but that doesn't mean that your mom makes less money than your dad on an individual level. Okay, and thanks, Noah. I'm sure you are, but we're all the best in our own mind, aren't we? Okay, so let's keep going. Next, what is the fallacy of composition? It's similar to division. It's just kind of in the opposite direction. What do you think? How would you put it? The composition fallacy. Composition. Just wait for it, but I think you already know what it is. We'll see what you put in there. Not in your notes, Jonah? Well, figure someone knows it. Got a bunch of us here, so what do they say? Two heads are greater than one, or something like that. There you go, Mateo. Thanks. So it is an attribute of one individual. Well, the way you're saying it's kind of a little awkward, but you say an attribute of one individual belonging to a group represents the entire group. Yeah, so it is. I would sort of just say it in the same way that Jonah did, just to the opposite. When a characteristic of an individual is incorrectly assumed to be a characteristic of a group that they're a part of. So the fallacy that the actions of a single member will be reflected in every member of a community. Well, Preston, the only thing about the way you put it is you talk about actions. And actions can only be taken by like living things. But you can also commit the composition fallacy when you're talking about non-living things. Like I could say that sodium is highly dangerous and so is chloride. So sodium chloride is very dangerous. But it's not, because sodium chloride is just the scientific name for table salt. When you put the two elements together, they're no longer unstable or dangerous to human beings. So it could be like what you're saying, Preston. Oh, my neighbor is a member of the NRA, and he's a let's say he's a hardcore right-wing nationalist, so all members of the NRA are right-wing. But that might be a fallacy of composition because you're drawing from one person and attributing their characteristic to the whole group. Yes, but it's not limited to people. So the only thing I would have said about your example or definition, Preston, was just to say that it's a fallacy where you assume that a characteristic of a member of a group is also a characteristic of the whole group. And just saying member leaves it ambiguous as to whether the member, so to speak, is like a person or a thing. Another example from the book was like room 101 is small, and so therefore the hotel is small. That's not necessarily true because you can have one room that's small, but it's a small part of a very big overall building. So anyways, there you go. Now let's go to the next thing. So we finished all the fallacies of ambiguity. Now we're on to the next category, which they call a fallacy of relevance. What is a fallacy of relevance? Fallacy of relevance. Oh, sorry, Paul. I remember you don't like that. Making me self-conscious, though. Because normally I wouldn't think about it, but now I am. It's okay. Let me know, though, what is a fallacy of relevance? It's a category of fallacies, so it encompasses, I think, 8 things in our class. But let's get that, let's get the definition out there. Relevance fallacy. What type of fallacy is this? It's when the argument has what things problematic about it. I mean, the information's all there. It's all out there. You just got to find it and report it back. That's what you got to do right now, just like you'll have to do it throughout the rest of your whole life. Okay, so what is this information? A fallacy of relevance. Really? Is it why are you not answering the question? Okay, Devin. When one or more of the premises in the argument are not relevant or they are unrelated to the conclusion. Yes, correct. Right? I mean, there it is. You know the answer. So just give me the answer. Okay. When one or more of the premises of the argument are irrelevant or unrelated to the conclusion. Yes, that's all correct. Anthony, your way of putting it is a little different, but it's essentially, on the right track. When you give examples or ideas that are not relevant to the topic. Well, I mean, thinking of an argument, though, the examples, the ideas would be like the premises given to try and support a conclusion. But the problem with the fallacy of relevance is that these premises stated do not properly relate to the conclusion, okay? So, all right then, so as we go through them, starting with ad hominem, pretty easy to say. What is ad hominem fallacy? Or sometimes it's called personal attack. Personal attack, ad hominem, which one is this? If we know the definition. Okay, thanks, Devin. Instead of presenting a logical counter-argument to somebody's claim or position, you just attack them personally. Yes, exactly. Someone supplies you with a very reasonable argument about a position that they hold. They state their evidence, and they ask you to consider the argument, and you say, well, you know what? It's totally a bad argument because if I just take one look at you, the way you're dressed, the way your breath smells, I mean, it's disgusting, so you don't know anything. But that obviously would not be a valid response because it doesn't really direct any kind of counter evidence or dispute against the premises itself. It's just making it personal. So that's always a bad way to argue when you resort to name calling, insults, etc. This means that you're not actually able to defend your own view or to show what's wrong with the other person's position. Okay, so thanks. Then let's go to appeal to force. Appeal to force is also, I think, pretty simple to say what it is. So what's that? Appeal to force fallacy. Somebody wants you to believe something, but the way they're going about it is you say Noah punished for having a belief rather than providing a logical counterargument. Well, it's not that they have to actually be punished, but at a minimum, it smells sour like, well, Jonah, now I'm losing track of your current comment. I don't know what you're even referring to there, but the the question is appeal to force. What is it? Now, Noah, your way of saying it is being punished for having a belief, but that's a little bit too informal. Being punished, I mean, the person might not actually receive any punishment, but at a minimum, when you're using appeal to force, you're at least, well, if not punishing, then what? Threaten to use force, or actually does, in an attempt to get another person to back down or accept your own view. Right. So, I mean, it's like you might actually, as you put it, punish the person, but you might also just threaten to do it. In many cases, you don't even have to make good on the threat because the threat is sufficient to make the person comply with whatever you're wanting. So you might say to the person, look, is that what you really think about immigration? Because if you say that stuff around me, I'm liable to just pop off and like attack you physically and kill you. So I mean, like that would be like the most extreme case possible. But if the person changes their mind, then you're not going to do anything, right? Say, never mind. Okay, I agree with you. All right, that's better. So you see, you didn't punish them, but you said you would. Or it could be like, I want you to live somewhere else. It's your parents talking to you. Like, okay, so if that's what you really believe, then maybe you shouldn't live in this house, under this roof. Or it's your boss saying, don't believe that, or else maybe I'll fire you. So there's a lot of possible cases, but in any of these different examples, there's no attempt to really make a rational argument for the conclusion. They're just saying, I have some leverage over you. If I can threaten you, or even actually make an attack of some kind, whether it's a literal attack of a physical nature or just a revocation of privileges or something, if I actually do this or threaten it, then I'm not making a rational appeal. I'm just trying to threaten and scare. Okay. Yeah, with abortion arguments, yikes. Yeah, well, sometimes I guess these arguments do devolve into just mutual fallacies, and that's why we try our best to learn a little bit of critical thinking so that we can do better than that in our own right. Okay, now we next talk about appeal to pity. That one's pretty simple and straightforward also. So there's a few here that are easy enough. What is the appeal to pity fallacy? Appeal to pity. You're trying to get somebody to change their mind, act differently, but based off of what? Con, an attempt to invoke a feeling of pity when pity is not related to the conclusion, right? Yeah, so it's basically like any time where you try to make someone feel sorry for you, or you try to get them to fall back on their emotions of sympathy in order to grant a concession or deviate from a standard procedure or something like that. So, saying to a professor, please don't, penalize me for not turning in these assignments at the time that they were due. I was just really going through it. Like I got a bad haircut and it devastated me right in the middle of the semester, and a lot of things were happening related to that. So if you could just help me out. Anyway, the point is, if it's a weak, insubstantial appeal to the person's feelings of sympathy, then that could, fall into the category. Yeah, well, I guess we all go through it in our own different ways, don't we, Noah? Anyway, so next, popular appeal. Popular appeal, what's that? Try to get somebody to believe something just based on what? If you have a list, just use that list and be ready. Tell me the next definition. Because it's just as, we just cover as much information as you can get through. Popular appeal. Many people agree that something is true. So it is an argument where a person says that something is true because of what? You're kind of in the right ballpark, Mateo, but it's not the most precise wording. A person tries to, gain support for their conclusion by appealing to what? Everyone else thinks it's true. Okay, what about phrases like this? By appealing to popular opinion, or by appealing to the view of the majority, or something like this. Yes. So a person says that some claim is true, correct, or right just because it's the popular view, or it's the view that's held by the majority of people. So it would be like saying, I don't know, God exists because most people believe so. Or this policy is a sound policy because I read a poll which said that there's a majority of people that agree with it. Stuff like that. Or substituting like judgment for just prevailing opinion. So you could say, this movie's the best because it's box office #1. Or, this song is the best because it's charting #1 on the charts. Okay, so you have to have a better argument than just saying something's popular, so that's why it's good or correct. All right, then appeal to ignorance. With appeal to ignorance, a person makes the claim that something is true, but only just because why? You can help finish that thought. Appeal to ignorance. Someone claims that something is true simply because of why? That's right, Jonah. Good. So a person claims something is true just because it has not been proven false. And also, correct, Khan, you could say, on the other hand, someone claims something's false just because nobody's proven that it's true. Right. So like if I say to you, there was massive election fraud just because no one could prove there wasn't. That's not really showing evidence of fraud. That's just saying to my critics, they've not been able to find evidence to the contrary. Well, you actually need affirmative evidence to support any claim, whether it's about something political, something scientific, or just in everyday life. You can't go over to someone and say, look, I know you're cheating on me because you cannot prove that you're not. You should have reasonable evidence to support the claim rather than just putting it on your dialectical opponent to supply evidence that disproves it. Okay, the burden of proof type of thing. That's right, Ian. When you're the one bringing the claim, you have to have evidence for the claim. You can't just say, I'm saying it's true, and it's up to everybody else to prove that I'm wrong. So Santa Claus exists. Prove me wrong. This is not the right kind of way to argue. You're instead supposed to say, look, I actually found the footprints of the reindeer on my roof, and I found some like little fibers in the chimney that I tested, and they come from the North Pole. And so, I have some supported evidence that there is a such thing as Santa. You don't just say there's Santa until proven otherwise. Okay, so just some examples. Funny examples, some of them. We can ask about hasty generalization. Hasty generalization, a person reaches a very broad conclusion, but based on what? Let me think about that with you guys. What's a hasty generalization fallacy? Yeah, appeal to ignorance does not include any evidence. It instead says that there's an absence of contrary evidence. But to the next question of hasty generalization, what do you think? What is that? Okay, there you go, Devin. So a person makes a universal claim based on a sample of evidence that's either too small, skewed, or biased. Exactly, yes. So it's jumping to conclusions too quickly. Hasty means too fast. Generalization is like a universal sentence. So it's jumping too quickly to a sweeping, broad, general claim. It'd be like saying, all men are pigs because of just the actions of maybe one or two men, or all children are hard to parent because you've seen a couple of children that are very, very difficult for their parents to raise. These are generalizations, but to make a generalization, you need a very solid basis of fact and evidence that supports it, not just a couple cases, perhaps chosen randomly. Maybe a pit bull has attacked somebody and you read about it in the news, and now your conclusion is pit bulls are just all brutal, vicious animals. But you're following one news report and using that as the sole basis to make this overly general claim. So I don't know. We can think of other examples, but just a few in passing there. Now, straw man. What is the straw man? That's another one. Straw man is when you take your opponent's argument, but you do what to it? So maybe that little hint will help stimulate your thought about it. With straw man, what is it? Strawman. There you go. So you misrepresent your opponent's argument and make it seem easier to critique. Yes. Distort or misrepresent the opponent's view so that it seems easier to refute that argument. Right. Somebody says, let me think about it. Someone says, well, do you want to go to the beach or something? And they say, no, it's a little bit too, I'm a little too busy to go to the beach today. And then their opponent reports back and it's like, okay, so you're basically saying you just don't ever like to have fun. What's wrong with you? Well, they didn't say they don't ever like to have fun. It's like they just said on this one occasion, I have some other obligations. But now they've been misrepresented by their, friend or whoever as saying something different than what they really said. So it makes it seem as though their position is less credible or less capable of defending. Ian, you refer to this thought of like all liberals being crazy social justice warrior, right? Well, I mean, suppose that a person made a valid argument about a social cause, and then they were misrepresented by their opponent as having a more radical view than that. So you can imagine somebody saying like, I don't know, police reform is important because we've seen a lot of bad incidents with police treatment of people they're trying to arrest. And then somebody says, well, if I'm understanding you correctly, that means you don't think we should have police at all? That's just insane. Matteo, no, it's not like hasty generalization. You gotta know, that's false. Hasty generalization is when you make an all statement based on limited evidence. Straw man is when you just misrepresent your opponent's view. It doesn't have anything to do with an all statement. If your opponent says, let's see, I eat meat, and then you say, well, why do you hate animals? That's a straw man because the person did not say they hate animals. They just said that they do eat meat. Now they're being misrepresented by their opponent as saying something that's way worse. So it sounds like their position is, easier to criticize. Okay. So you're just speaking in response to Matteo's, Matteo, you're speaking in response to Ian's comment. I get it now. Yeah, so hopefully that makes sense to you guys. Straw man, if you want a visual reminder, something memorable, think of a scarecrow, because straw man is actually supposed to literally refer to the symbol of a scarecrow, like a man made of straw, because it's not the real man. It's a fake version of the man, and you're replying to that version instead of the real person. So while you're attacking the person's straw man version of the argument, the real argument is being neglected and not addressed. So if somebody says, climate change is a problem, so maybe we should limit fossil fuels. And then a person says, okay, well, so according to you, we should just all turn our, gas vehicles over to the government and walk around and not even be able to commute to work. Well, that's insane. But the person didn't really say that, so again, it would be a misrepresentation, an overhype, or an oversimplification of the other person's viewpoint. And this happens by people on all sides. I just talked to you about like, okay, someone on a conservative viewpoint is misrepresented by a liberal, or a liberal is misrepresented by a conservative, but it doesn't even have to do with political affiliation either. It can also just have to do with ideology of other kinds. But anyway, thanks, that's good. So we can move to the next thing, which is red herring. What is a red herring fallacy? Red herring? Something about these little fish. They're called herring. This is supposed to be, helpful in the way of thinking about this concept. So what is a red herring fallacy? It is sidetracking an argument, yes, that's right. So when you do it, you basically bring up a different unrelated topic to sort of have a tangent away from the main topic or argument. It would be like if somebody said, I don't know, why don't you support, let's see. Don't you think it's a problem that there's so many opioids being prescribed in our country and a lot of people are becoming addicted? I say that's a problem. We really should take a look at that with our policies. And someone else says, hey man, that's no problem at all because, have you seen how many people are on street drugs? So many people on street drugs, so don't tell me that's a problem. But it's a complete red herring because it's bringing up a separate topic. I know they're both sort of in the ballpark of something having to do with drugs and psychoactive substances, but you can't really disclaim that we have a problem with opioid prescriptions just because there are also people that are addicted to street drugs. Or to give a more obvious example, somebody says pollution is, causing the planet to heat up. And somebody else says, yeah, well, I don't really think that's a huge issue though, because look at crime. Crime is the main thing. Well, they're different topics though, so in the one case, you're not going to be able to counter a person's view just by bringing up something that's not even related to it. Or sometimes it happens in personal contexts, which sort of blurs the line between a personal attack, I guess. So maybe I don't want to give you examples like that to confuse you too much. But anyway, okay, bringing up unrelated topics, correct. A different topic than what was stated or mentioned in the original course of conversation or argument. And red herring is thought of by that name because hunters will sometimes take these smelly herring and use them as a decoy to try and trick the hound into being thrown off the track of the main animal that is trying to retrieve to the hunter. And when they're very well trained, the red herring smell doesn't throw them off. But when they're still learning, then the red herring might distract them. So in a conversation, if a person drops a red herring, it's kind of like them trying to distract the dog, which is you in this case, and gets you to divert from your original focus. Okay, so then what is an unwarranted assumption fallacy? So that's the third and last category from chapter 5 that we all want to kind of brush up on. So about unwarranted assumption fallacies, what are they? It's like the argument, how do you put it? The argument contains certain things that are not blah, 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 blank. Tell me what you think the correct definition would be. There you go, thanks. So when an argument includes an assumption or assumptions that are not supported by evidence, correct. So unwarranted means not justified. And so these are fallacies, right, where you've got unsupported information that's given in the argument. So next, let's go through some of them in that category. So there's, I think, 7, starting with begging the question. So the begging the question fallacy, so sometimes it's called circular argument. How does this one go, if we can remember? Begging the question. There's something in the argument which is similar to another part of the argument, but say more. What do you think? With begging the question. Begging the question. Yeah, there you go. So there's a premise, which is simply a slightly reworded version of the conclusion. Or you could say it the other way, right, Mateo? That the conclusion is a reformulation of one premise. Yeah, So with an argument, the premises are supposed to be the evidence that backs the conclusion up. But the evidence cannot be the same thing as what it's supposed to prove. If I say Jones is guilty and you're like, prove it, and I say, okay, you want to know why he's guilty? Because he's not innocent. That's not an argument, though, because I've just repeated it in slightly different words. Okay, so what's really an argument that's not circular is when the evidence is independent of the claim that it's trying to back. So if a person made the argument that, abortion is wrong because it's not right, that would be a circular argument. Or if somebody says it's not wrong because it's morally permitted, that would be also a circular argument. If someone says, God exists and therefore there's no way that he doesn't exist, that would be yet another circular argument. Now I'm giving you some that are pretty bluntly stated. And a real begging the question argument, there's typically a little bit more of an attempt to conceal the circularity by making it seem like not such a direct reference to the other claim. But if you're wise to the ways of fallacies, then you'll be able to see right through that and detect when there is, in fact, a circular argument. Okay. So we can go to the next thing. Like if I say LeBron James is the best basketball player in history because there has never, ever been one basketball player that's been close to how good he is, that would also be circular because, I'm just saying the same thing in slightly different ways. To be the best of all time is to be the one that nobody else is as good. But you could make that argument, I think, based on valid premises, if you had the interest in that conclusion. Okay, so next up, what is a loaded, I'm skipping one. Inappropriate appeal to authority. Inappropriate appeal to authority, what could that type of fallacy be? You're trying to gain support for your conclusion, but you're going to the wrong place. How would you define this thought? Let me know. With inappropriate appeal to authority. Maybe not the hardest one to think of based just off the name itself. Or maybe it is hard. I mean, I guess it's for you to say, but okay. So that's right. Someone appeals to some so-called authority on a subject, but this person's not really authoritative on the topic at all. Like if you say, hey, there's a politician and they say I don't need a mask, well, maybe there's a scientist that would disagree. At the same time, though, CDC guidance has changed. So I guess now we might see in the opposite direction. The scientist says there's no need for the mask. The politician says there is. In that case, you might say that, yet again, there's an inappropriate appeal to authority if a person relies on the false type of expertise. In general, sometimes people make this type of fallacy because people that are respected sources of opinion in one topic area are sometimes falsely assumed to be credible in others. I think of this guy, Joe Rogan and stuff, who doesn't know anything about anything really. He's like not a specialist in anything, but he's got a lot of views, doesn't he? He seems to offer them freely. And then people repeat them in the world as though they're coming from some type of valued source of opinion. But anyway, lots of examples could be given. I'm sure you can think of some too. Let's continue from there. What's next is the loaded question. Okay, so what's loaded question fallacy? How many loaded questions have you asked this semester, I wonder? But anyway, what's a loaded question fallacy? There you go. That's right. Good. So it's when somebody asks a type of question which has an assumption of something in it that you don't know. You ask a question which assumes the answer to something else that you didn't ask. So one way I think we may define it earlier was when you ask a question that assumes an answer to a different unasked question. So if you understand that, then maybe somebody can just type out a loaded question here in the chat. What do you think? What loaded question would you be able to think of to see if this concept can be applied to an example? So let me know. Loaded question. Fire away. What do you have? How many children do you have? Okay, good. There you go. If a person's never had children, then they couldn't really give an answer. Although the thing about these loaded questions, which ask that start with the term "how many," I think they're kind of on the borderline, because it's possible, I guess, for a person to say 0, because 0, after all, is a number. So I mean, I guess if you had slightly modified it, that it would eliminate that small issue. You could say something like, what's the name of your first child? And in that case, it definitely assumes that you have at least one. You can't say a name like of anything if you never had a kid. Or like, how long have you been married? Another possibility. Why were you drinking and driving last night? Okay, good. Yeah. So like the lawyer or the prosecutor, maybe the judge asks you this, or police officer, or your parents or somebody, and maybe it didn't happen. Yeah, that would work, because you're asking about the motive behind something that maybe didn't happen. It would be like me saying to you, why did you cheat on me? Like if you're a partner of somebody and you didn't cheat. They're asking why you did it, but it's a loaded question because they're assuming that you did already when they ask. So you can't really give a motive if it didn't happen. Yeah, it making sense? Okay, cool, thanks. Yeah, so those are different good examples. Now, false dilemma fallacy. What do you think? It's true, Mateo, you could be married for 0 years. So I feel like I didn't offer the perfect example in my own kind of improvised response right there. If you want, then we could have made it a different question, like where did you meet your husband or wife? And in that case, it would have been a pure loaded question. Yeah. Okay. Or where'd you guys go on your first date or something like that, Where'd you go on your honeymoon? I don't know. Another case. Okay. Yeah, so reduces responses to a complex issue. Don't forget that part, because it's got to be like the issue doesn't just have 2 possible reactions, but there's more than 2. So when a person reduces the responses to a complex issue to a binary either or choice, this is like oversimplifying something where there's more than 2 ways of replying to it. Like, what if I ask a person or say to a person, what's your position on the United States? Are you like a flag-waving patriot, or you just hate this country? I mean, because that'll tell me a lot about you. This by itself is a false dilemma, because there's many people that are not so passionate on either side when it comes to the concept of the display of patriotism or whatever. So, in any case where there's a variety of intermediate possibilities, you could say that there's a false dilemma. I guess sometimes it is argued that in a world where we have more than 2 gender identities, if a person is, thrown into a binary classification system, like, okay, tell me, are you a man or a woman? Some people may say that this is a false dilemma because there's more possibilities than that. There's more than 2 possible political affiliations, religious affiliations. Are you a Christian or are you an atheist? Could be a false dilemma if it was posed as a question. And sometimes they're not posed as questions. Sometimes they're stated as assertions. Like, you receive the census form, and it says, let me think about this. Like, it only gives you 2 options with how to designate your ethnicity, but you feel like that doesn't capture the nuance. Actually, I know people like this that are from of Indian origin, from India and stuff. And on the current census forms, mark off South Asian, which is included in a lot of other more traditionally thought of as like Asian countries. And so you might argue that if I'm only given these 2 choices, there's a variety of possibilities that are being ignored. Anyways, okay. What about questionable cause? What's the questionable cause fallacy? This one's easy enough, I think, to say. Given a choice between 2 things, like which Gatorade is better, blue or red? Yeah, there you go. Another possibility. What if it was a taste test, and somebody says to you, what are you, a Coke person or a Pepsi person? Or do you like Ford or Chevy cars? In any case like that, when there's a whole variety of other possible options, then you would be looking at a false dilemma, yes. Questionable cause, anybody? What's this? false dilemma also in advertising, while I'm just thinking about examples. If it says, look at us and look at the competitor's brand, like as if there's only 2 brands, but in fact there's like a whole bunch. Sometimes they sell us products like that by just picking on one weak competitor and showcasing the value of their product against that one, as though there's not a whole bunch of other options too. But yeah, to questionable cause, just go ahead and put it out there. Person assumes with no evidence, or just at least with not good evidence, yeah, that one thing is the cause of another. Right. So if one thing happens and then another thing happens afterwards, that is not enough by itself to just say that the first thing caused the other one. You need to have like really clear causal connection that you can draw between the 2 things. And so sometimes people make these kind of correlation implies causation fallacies of this kind. Sometimes they do it when they're thinking in superstitious terms. Something bad happened to them after they thought they received like some kind of bad luck omen, and then they connect the 2 events, although there's no causal relationship between them. Babe Ruth, he cursed the Yankees, I think, for trading him to the Red Sox or whatever, and they didn't win the World Series for 84 years after that. And so people were like saying the curse was the cause, but obviously it had everything to do with the players and the conditions, not some kind of curse by a long deceased baseball legend. And they eventually did win the World Series anyway, so much for that. But okay, he cursed the Red Sox. Thanks, Paul, for correcting my historical inaccuracy. He cursed the Red Sox because he was traded to the Yankees from the Red Sox. Right, yeah, the baseball gods. That's funny. Well, that 04, it almost looked like they overcame the curse, because I don't know if you know the facts about that series, but it's, I think, the only time in history that the team came back from 03. So it's like beating the curse. They were really up against it, but they did it. Okay, so next, slippery slope. What's the slippery slope fallacy? What do you think? How would you say it? Jonah, referring to memorable events error. Maybe you're referring to it in reference to my previous example, but I'm not sure if you intended that to be the answer to the current question. It's not exactly on point, but I can maybe see how it relates to the example of Babe Ruth. Okay, so yeah, slippery slope. Matteo, you're saying this, assuming that one event will lead to another, kind of, but there's a bit more detail. Paul, you say this, a giant chain of events that leads to worse and worse. That's a little closer, yeah. So it's kind of like it's the unjustified assumption that if one action is either taken or allowed, then all actions of that kind will eventually be either taken or allowed. And typically, it's described as a series of worse and worse actions of that kind. So it's like, don't let your kids stay out, an extra 30 minutes beyond curfew tonight, because that's going to put them on a slippery slope towards a life of total drug addiction and crime, when they realize that there's no such things as rules and they should just be free to break them at their liberty. Or the gateway drug argument that some have pointed out as an example. Don't try and even take a sip of alcohol, because it's a surefire pathway to you being a complete addict that can never be a productive member of society. Or examples abound. So those are all slippery slope. Think of a person standing atop a high slope. It's slippery, and if they take one step, then the prediction is they're going to fall all the way down the hill. So just don't take the one step. Don't allow the integration of same-sex couples into marriage, because if that step is allowed, then it puts us on a path towards different and more non-traditional forms of matrimony, up to and perhaps including marriage to yourself, to your tables and furniture. But anyway, these are slippery slope arguments. Give an inch, take a mile. That's one perhaps application of it. It's not always stated in terms of somebody needing to take things that they've been given, but I think you understand that the reference, it works for the most part. So then there's naturalistic fallacy. Naturalistic fallacy, one last one, and then we'll be done with the chapter 5 material. What do you think that one was with naturalistic? It's the assumption, it's not always justified, that everything that is such and such has to be good, and everything that's not such and such has to be bad. What am I referring to here? If it's natural, it's good. If it's not natural, it's bad, right? And so in the definition of natural that some person has invented, something natural must be good. You've ever heard of these kind of new age wellness methods and stuff, like advocated by Gwyneth Paltrow and all that goop? A lot of that stuff is not necessarily scientifically credible, but the argument that she's giving is based on these naturalistic ways of thinking fallaciously. You know, if it's something that's derived from a natural thing, it must be good. Yeah, clean, a euphemism that's often used for certain kind of production methods or dietary regiments. It's way that products are marketed to us sometimes. You know, you see like a little green leaf on the label of the food product, and that's supposed to ensure that it's nothing bad about it, even though it's perhaps, you know, junk food or something with like high salt content and a lot of fat, but it's, you know, it's organic though. The original Wonder Bread was so popular because it was white and implied to be clean. Well, perhaps, but you know, just the color coding and branding is not necessarily the same thing as the naturalistic fallacy in and of itself. Yeah, with Wonder Bread, I mean, it's not the most complex grain, so there's some reasonable critique of it, I guess, from a dietary or nutritional point of view, like, you know, but that's, I think, a criticism that could apply to all forms of white bread as opposed to like wheat and more complex grains. You know, the argument is that the digestive system has to work a little bit harder to break down more complex and less processed grains, and therefore it's a little bit healthier for you because it raises your metabolism and other things like that. But yeah, factory bread, dirty, mass-produced bread, you know, is perhaps going to be affiliated with that, but it's not necessarily true in every case. Okay, bleached out and remove the whole grain. Well, you know a lot about Wonder Bread, so you enlightened me a little bit on the history of that consumer product. Let's continue. There's just a few more things I want us to make sure we cover with the time we still do have. So we've looked at all the chapter 5 stuff. By the way, let me say this too about the naturalistic before I move on. It's not always just saying something natural is good. It can also be like something unnatural is bad. So don't get chemotherapy or radiation if you got cancer, because that doesn't grow on trees, so it can't be good for you. But it's, after all, the most effective method to aggressively treat some forms of, you know, metastasizing cancer. You know, or maybe you should just shut off this computer right now. What are you doing? This thing is evil, isn't it? Because it's not a product of nature. It's a product of technology. At the end of the day, though, a lot of things that are natural are bad. Sometimes they're good. You just have to look at them on a case-by-case basis. And likewise for things that are so-called not natural. Even though, as I've said, I think one time at least prior to this, I have philosophical questions about how do we delineate what's natural and what isn't, because we're living in a natural universe, so I don't know how any of it is really not natural. But anyway, so chapter 10 and 11 are all about the media. I didn't have a lot of questions on that because I thought I already gave you a pretty decent range of assignments on it, you know, the homework about finding fallacies in ads and everything. But media literacy, just being able to understand and influence the, being able to understand the influence of mass media. What is product placement? So that is when the product is placed in the programming itself instead of during breaks or intermissions. So like, say, if, you know, your favorite character in a TV show or Netflix series is eating Wonder Bread, right there, clearly marked in the episode, then that would be like a contractual licensing agreement between the Wonder Bread company and the distributors of this media. And that's a covert attempt to market it to you by putting it in the dedicated programming time. Okay, what are 3 main purposes of ads? So the 3 big ones are to create product awareness, just remind you that it exists. Another one is to inform consumers about the product or service. So, you know, like to tell you what it might do or why you might want it. And another would be just to stimulate consumer demand, to drive up interest in it, whether or not that's necessarily derived from information about the product itself. So it's like product information, hype, and then just reminding you that it exists. And sometimes ads can accomplish more than one of these in a single setting or a single marketing impression. Okay, then after that we have chapter 12, which is all about science and different assumptions of science. So it's getting now closer to the more recent material. So there's a whole grab bag of things from that chapter 12. What's the assumption of unity? This would be the assumption that the universe overall is unified, and therefore there should be one set of scientific laws and principles that could explain everything. That's the goal of science in the long run, to be able to provide a grand unified theory that could explain all phenomena from the biggest to the smallest. So science assumes that the universe is unified and can be explained that way sometime. Limitations of science. The book described a couple of different ones, and I know we talked about them at least a few times earlier in the class. One limitation is that science can only study observable things. So if there was anything that could not be observed, like say there were ghosts, souls, angels, spirits, anything like that, or even just dark matter, then those things would be very hard for science to ever fully comprehend because they'd be outside the realm of physical things that could be observed. Another limitation is the assumption of predictability, which says that we think that the natural laws of the universe will never change. Some say, how can you really know that if we don't have yet, access to the future, the future in which we assume these laws will continue to hold, fundamental laws of nature. Another limitation of science is that it does assume that the external world exists after all, which cannot be absolutely proven, but must be just at least granted as an assumption. And then, I don't know, did I have one more? Just going to go back in my notes to make sure I'm not forgetting any of those. Yeah, predictability is one area of critique. We can only study what's observable, and it assumes the existence of the external world. Okay, so there were three limitations of science. Now, what's the scientific method? There are more precise questions later on in the study guide that go over specific steps within the method, but in general, the scientific method is a procedure where you move from the observation of facts to the development of hypotheses that explain why those things happen, and then finally you arrive at explanations that you can test. So you test those hypotheses to see if they're correct. So it's basically like the big three of the 5 steps are observation, hypothesis, and test. And in the end, what we hope to get from all that is the correct explanation of the observed phenomena that we saw in the beginning. And when we get it, that means that the hypothesis was verified through the experiment. Okay, so how is the 3 stages of critical thinking similar to the scientific method? Well, there are these 3 steps to each. In critical thinking, it is experience, interpretation, and analysis. In science, the big 3 that I just talked about are observation, hypothesis, and then test. And those 3 things are both similar to each other because at the first stage, whether it's experiencing something or observing the world, they're similar. You're just looking at the world and you're finding something that happened. The next step where you either have a hypothesis or you try to interpret the experience, that's when you try and give the explanation why it happened. And then the third step of both is also similar because with your experiment, you're testing to see if you have the right hypothesis. And with analysis, you're kind of checking on your own to see if your interpretation was right or not. Okay, so you're putting the explanation that you suggested to the test in both cases. All right, now there's the steps of the scientific method. There's different questions about these steps. The first one is identifying a problem. And with that, you basically just go into the world and try to identify some unexplained event or phenomenon. So you've got to try and look into the world, see something happening that needs to be explained, yet explained, and then that gets the process started. What could that so-called problem or identified problem be? It could be any number of things. Declining numbers of bees, meteorological events, global warming, all the way down to more particular things like how a disease transmits, what its origins could be, etc. Next, developing an initial hypothesis. So this is when you try to provide your first tentative, educated scientific guess to explain the occurrence of whatever problem it is that you identified in the first step. So you're trying to give an explanation why it happens, what the reason is, which is the second step. Testing the hypothesis in some kind of either controlled or real-world setting. You create an experiment to see whether or not the hypothesis is true or false. Okay, so testing a hypothesis is running an experiment that can either verify it or disconfirm it. And at the end, the fifth step, after you did the test, is you look at the results and you see, do these results confirm the hypothesis or do they disconfirm it? If they confirm it, then you should simply publish that study so that other scientists in the field can try to reproduce the results. But if it did not get confirmed by the experiment, that means you don't have the right hypothesis. So then you would create a new one and repeat these steps again until you get verification from the experiment. So there's some questions in here about what are qualities of a good scientific theory or hypothesis. One of them is relevance to the problem being studied. That's very fundamental and basic. You just have to make sure at least that whatever your hypothesis is on the same topic as the thing that you're trying to explain. So it has to at least be within the framework of relevance. A good hypothesis will have predictive power. So predictive power is when a good theory can be used to make accurate predictions of similar things in the future. Based on the knowledge that we have of physics and astronomy, we can make very accurate predictions of the date and time and optimal location for viewing of the next solar or lunar eclipse, or the time at which asteroid showers will pass by the Earth in certain places that can be visible to those with telescopes. Or we know the result of certain chemical interactions based on our existing knowledge of chemistry. Another example, the hypothesis of the Big Bang enables us to make quite accurate predictions of the distribution of matter in the universe because it predicts that there should be an expansion of matter out from that event. Okay, let me touch base with you for a minute. Who's Nicholas Copernicus? Who could tell me what he is or who he was, what he discovered? He's an important figure in the history of science in the West. So what was his kind of claim to fame or legacy? Copernicus, we still say his name. Why? That's right. He is the Polish astronomer that discovered the heliocentric model of the solar system, and that replaced geocentrism. Tell me what do those words mean? What is the heliocentric model? What other model did it replace? We can see the words, but let's make sure we all know what they mean. What's the heliocentric model? Because to know why it's important, you'd say this. So let's just ask that little follow-up question. Yes, the heliocentric is that the sun is at the center and we revolve around it. And that replaced the geocentric model. And on the geocentric model, the Earth was at the center and everything revolved around us. Before Copernicus and Galileo, it was an important doctrine of the church to advocate geocentrism, because the belief was that God, placing human beings in his image on this planet, would have wanted us to be right in the center. Okay, then materialism in science. So an assumption of science, one of the basic assumptions is what's called materialism. Some call it physicalism. And that just means that it's the belief that everything in the whole universe is just made out of physical matter, which could be thought of as little atoms at the last detail. And everything's made out of matter, even human beings, even our consciousness and our mind. So if I ask you right now to think of a song, it's well, there's no audio playing in the space around you, it's just in your head. And so you might be thinking, well, thoughts and feelings like that, they don't exist kind of physically. They're just consciousness, and consciousness is a formless and disembodied and spiritual, immaterial. But according to materialism, no, even that thought you're having of that song or whatever, or the mental image that you may be replaying of a memory you had, even though it's not something that's visible to other people, it's still based on your physical brain. And so it's just a byproduct of the brain waves and neurological action of the brain itself. So anyway, physicalism, everything's physical, even the thoughts and consciousness that we have is physical, made out of matter. What is science? Well, science overall is just trying to provide testable explanations for observed phenomena. So we reason from observed facts to testable explanations for the facts. So you start with observation, stuff is happening, you try to give explanations for these things that then can be tested to prove that they're correct explanations. So reasoning from observable facts to testable explanations. Science and religion. So I could have maybe worded the question a little more carefully, but I was really thinking in that about what are the different attitudes that the book talks about that people can have about the relationship of science to religion. So there were 4 of them overall. One attitude is that religion should be taken to have priority over science if they don't agree. Another view is the reverse, which is that science should be given priority if it disagrees with religion. And then a third view is that they deal with different topics, so there's no room for conflict because they do not discuss the same material. And a fourth possible view is that they do agree that if we interpret religion and science the right way, then we will see that in the end they've actually been saying the same thing all along, whether that has to do with, I don't know, evolution or genesis of the universe and mankind or whatever. Okay. So we continue from there with the questions about theory versus hypothesis. Okay, so hypothesis, I think probably you all know, is just an educated scientific guess to explain an observed phenomena. Well, what's the difference between that and a hypothesis? And a theory, I mean. A theory is just a very well proven hypothesis. Now, in asking this question in the past, I've seen some people say, well, hypothesis has never been tested and a theory has been. But that's a little bit too simple, guys. A hypothesis can have received testing. It might even have been confirmed by tests. But it's not enough for it to be a theory if it was just confirmed once. It has to be confirmed, reconfirmed widely by a whole variety of people in different research settings to find the same results. So a hypothesis is something that could be on its way to becoming a theory, but only after it is reconfirmed and replicated a significant number of times will it attain the status of theory. So theory is just a well-proven hypothesis, and a hypothesis is just a tentative explanation that needs further confirmation to be put on a level of theory. So theories are just very well-proven hypotheses. Okay. But hypothesis doesn't mean it's never been tested. It just means it hasn't been tested and proven as much. Okay. Now, gaining additional info to refine a hypothesis. Okay, so once you state a hypothesis, sometimes you might have to make slight edits or modifications to it in the light of some initial data that you're collecting. Okay, so like you have a hypothesis that that women face greater risks from a certain type of consumable product, like maybe milk or whatever. I'm just making this up. But suppose that there were some research findings that seemed to indicate that, but then you start to study the topic in more depth and you realize that it's actually a certain age group and not just women of all kinds. So now your hypothesis has been narrowed to like women aged 18 to 40 or something like that. Okay, so sometimes slight modifications to a hypothesis must be done in order to reflect your initial data collection. Then, well, consistency with other well-established theories. So if you have a good hypothesis, it should be consistent with the other theories that have already been proven. So it should not contradict them, it should not invalidate them, it should fit right in and not contradict the other well-proven theories. Otherwise, that would be something that would be a red flag. If it contradicts other well-proven theories, chances are the problem is with this new theory, not with the existing body of knowledge. Okay. Falsifiability. A good scientific hypothesis has to have some type of way of being proven false. And if it does, falsifiability. So it is when a good scientific theory can be proven false. That does not mean that it will be proven false or that it is false. It just means that we know what we would have to look for in an experiment if the theory was wrong. But if we don't even know how to test to see whether it was false, then of course we can't verify that it's true either. So, if you take like some of the psychic predictions of Nostradamus rather, there's no way that these claims could be falsified, because anything that you would point out that seems not to match the prediction, they'll just say, oh, well, it's a very subtle prediction and there's some aspects of it that I think you just overlooked. Same kind of with astrology. If you say that this prediction doesn't match your experience, they'll just say, then you're not paying enough good attention to your own life. They'll never say, okay, fair enough, falsification has happened. So if there's no method to falsify, it's not a scientific claim. Okay, and let's see to the next. Simplicity, or slash Occam's razor. It's a good quality of a scientific hypothesis or theory if it's the simplest of all available explanations for the event. So basically, here's the thought. If you have two explanations for something, then which one is likelier to be true? The one that is simpler, the one that contains fewer assumptions is likelier to be true. I think I might have given you guys an example of like, say my car was missing, and maybe on the one hand I think it's just because it was stolen or towed. On the other hand, I'm thinking maybe aliens abducted it. And one of those hypotheses is a lot more complicated than the other one because it requires a whole array of additional assumptions, and I'm sure you can tell which one it is. So in that case, we'd prefer the other explanation as being likelier to be correct. Okay. Predictability. That the universe overall is orderly and predictable, so established cause-effect relationships will never change, they will hold forever. So if I ask you about that and I say, what's an example of that? You shouldn't just say this. You shouldn't just say, well, look, if I have a marker and I release it, it'll drop. Yes, but it's not just that. It's not just that it will drop once. It's that it would drop forever, till the end of time, to infinity, to eternity. They would keep doing this for the whole rest of the future. Because if you just say, oh, if I drop it, it'll drop, that doesn't say that these laws are permanent. Okay, so the assumption of predictability is that laws like the laws of nature, gravity, physics, entropy, that those things are permanent and that they function the same way forever. Now, can we know this for sure? Well, you're not going to be alive in like 10,000 years to see markers dropping anymore, but a scientist will assume that these laws of nature are not going to stop and that they've always been and that they always will be. Okay. Paul, can you provide any nuance between consistency and predictability in the laws of nature example? Well, consistency and predictability in the laws of nature. Predictability, you know what will happen based on the functioning of these natural laws that are unchanging, that are immutable, not subject to change. Now, when you talk about consistency, Paul, are you asking me about consistency with well-established theories? Is that what you're referring to with the term consistency? Because that's quite different. Consistency with well-established theories just means that you have a hypothesis that does not, go against what we've already learned before. And Paul, you say you have used a very similar example for consistency too, I thought, as you just used for predictability. No, consistency, Paul, if you remember, was this. If I told you that Santa Claus delivered the gifts, that would run contrary to the law of gravity and would also run contrary to certain principles of biology, according to which reindeer can't fly and a sleigh cannot become airborne without a proper propulsion mechanism. So those things would be undermined by the hypothesis that Santa delivered the gifts according to the legend of Christmas of Santa Claus that you're all aware of. So that would be a bad theory because that would be contradictory to other well-established things that we know. And the marker dropping example is just for predictability. So I think your memory is wrong. The example I used for predictability has only been the marker dropping example. And the example for consistency had nothing to do with that. Okay, let's keep going. What is the assumption of objectivity in science? That's okay. We're all human, right? But the assumption of objectivity in science is which assumption? It's the assumption that the, that we can do what? Maybe I'll just say it, unless you've got it on the tip of your tongue. That we can learn about something. What thing? The assumption of objectivity. Just let me know. The basic assumption of science called objectivity is the assumption that we can blank and without blank. So I tried to run through this chapter 12 stuff to give you guys as much detail and review as possible. But you can't meet me halfway to give me one definition right now when I'm asking about objectivity. Come on now, let's do this. What is objectivity? Yes, that we can learn about the material world as it, what? As it, memories or notes or books. Just say it. We can learn about the material world, the physical world, the universe as it really is. Yes, as it truly is, and with no bias. Okay, there you go. So the assumption of objectivity is that there's an objective universe to learn about, full of facts that are not just based on bias or subjective point of view, that there's objective facts, we can learn about them, and that we can do it without bias. Not as it appears, Preston, no. As it is, not how it appears. How things appear could be fake, but how things are is real. And in science, we assume that we can learn about how things actually are, not just how they look. But we can learn about how things really are, and that we can do it with no bias. Okay, so from there, there's a question about pseudoscience. Pseudoscience is fake science. It's something that tries to masquerade as science in an attempt to gain legitimacy, but it's not based on the scientific method, and it's not based on falsifiable claims. So that's stuff like astrology, tarot cards, numerology, whatever. Sir Francis Bacon, the British philosopher and statesman who created the scientific method. And then you've got empiricism, which is the view that most human knowledge comes from the five senses and observation. Now, the only stuff that's left, and I guess I leave this to you guys, is to look at the material from chapter 9 on ethics that we just recently completed. So, ethics, study of morality and moral concepts, moral reasoning, when you make some decision about what's right or wrong, what you should or shouldn't do, different types of moral action. There's morally permissible, impermissible, obligatory. You could talk about those definitions if that question came up. Moral values that benefit you and other people, but they're also considered good for their own sake. Non-moral values are more self-oriented, goal-driven, and they're a means to an end. Conscience, innate source of knowledge about what's right and wrong. Different, moral sentiments are listed there. What's the difference between guilt and shame? Think about the 3 stages of moral development: pre-conventional, conventional, post-conventional. And then we have information about the different moral theories that we studied. Know what's the difference between liberty and welfare rights. Know what examples are of them. What are virtues? Know about the categorical imperative, which says to act always to act only on maxims that could be universal laws, or never treat people as a means. And then with utilitarianism, just know that it's based on the greatest happiness principle. It says to promote the greatest amount of happiness for the greatest number, stated by John Stuart Mill. And so there's some stuff there. You can review more of it in depth if you like after this. But that's about it, guys. That's all we had time for. So we've come to the end. So I guess for now then, I'm just going to say thanks so much for hanging in there through a tough semester. And it's been a tough school year, I know, for a lot of people with the pandemic and everything else. But here you are, and you survived. And so, hats off to you. I'm proud of you guys for sticking through a tough year. But on Thursday, I'm going to send you this exam, and then you'll take it and send back your answers to me before 2:10 p.m. on Thursday. And so I guess other than that, I'm wishing you guys the best, not just in my class, but in life and everything else. I'm glad that I could be your guys' professor and that we could cross paths this way, and hopefully maybe in the fall or something. I'll see you guys around campus. I'm not sure if we're going to be back in person at OCC in the fall or just in a limited way, but I know that we're ramping up to that for sure in the spring, if not before. So, all right, guys, if you need anything between now and Thursday, just feel free to email me, and I'll be in touch with you. If you've asked me for a grade check, then I'll definitely be back in touch with you later tonight, if not latest tomorrow morning, and you'll know your grades going into the final. So, all right, guys, I'm going to sign off. Thank you so much. I appreciate all your kind words, but I just do this because of all you guys, and it means a lot to me to feel like I'm at least having a little bit of a small impact, making your lives better and giving you some skills that you can use in life. So, till next time, I'll see you guys around and be in touch. Okay, then, have a good one. Bye-bye.